Sean Ackbeline here, and in the studio with me is Steve Kent, who has decided to toss his name in to become one of our next counselors. Good morning, Steve.
Good morning, Sean.
Or Stavros, as Facebook likes to call you.
Sometimes.
Steve, right off the coattails of the All Candidates Forum, how did you feel that went?
Oh, I thought it went really well. I was happy with all the responses of every one of the candidates. I would be happy to vote for any of them. I'd also be happy to work with any of them. Irrespective of the results, Revelstoke's going to get a very good council this year.
You came here in 2002. What made you decide to put your name into the ring this time around?
I've asked myself that many times. I've come up with many reasons not to do it, talked myself out of it several times, and I always come back to, I'm going to run for council this year. And I think I've just sort of developed an interest in the workings of council as it relates to my work. As a result of that, I've noticed that I could do that job. I'd like to take a turn at it.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned as a result of your work, because I think some people throw their name into their hat because they're running into roadblocks themselves within their business. What is it that you do that led you to go, I'm tired of this red tape? And I'm assuming that it's part and parcel of why you've landed where you've landed as a final straw.
Sort of. I wouldn't actually say that. The red tape that you refer to, it's frustrating. Personally, have trouble with red tape. In response to that, I just changed what I did, the nature of my work. I've started doing smaller jobs, not working so much with the city. I haven't had a building permit in 3 years. Just don't really do that anymore.
You work around the issue.
Pretty much.
You'll be doing a lot of that if you get on council too. How do we work around this issue? What over the last 4 or 5 years have you seen that's become an issue that you think needs to be addressed?
Housing is a huge issue. We've got to deal with that, I think, as quickly as possible, although it's probably a pretty large project dealing with it.
Well, those questions that came yesterday, you got 1 minute to answer. Did you get those questions ahead of time?
No, definitely not.
Trying to process those questions could take a minute, let alone responding to them in one.
Well, it's only difficult when you're the first one to answer the question.
Yeah. By the time you go through 11, I got a quick idea here, and I can repeat what Gary said. That worked.
Yeah.
Well, with affordable housing, we've used the word affordable, we've used the word attainable, and we've got a different spectrum of different income levels, which changes what affordability means to each and every one of us. Now, at the end of the day, if we have social housing, it can take stress off of one area, but it might add to another one. So you had a few ideas as to how we can look at affordable housing, but I thought I'd give you a platform here to be able to kind of talk a little bit more about it and not necessarily have a 1 minute time frame.
I'd like to see the city more receptive to different ideas as far as housing goes. I think the tiny home movement is fantastic. It's exciting. I've also find it a little frustrating that the city seems to be against carriage houses, where I've lived in other communities where carriage houses are embraced. It's a great way to have a tenant that you don't share a wall with, which makes it more affordable to have the house. I'd like to offer more incentives so that if somebody is willing to build a secondary suite in their house and enter into a covenant with the city whereby it would be in the rental pool, it would always be monthly rental, then I think we should be offering lower or no DCC rates and perhaps even a residential tax break for a number of years.
That's an interesting concept. What is it that you think the city, if that is true, that the city has a hard time opening up to the idea of, as you said,
carriage homes?
What do you think the obstacle is?
I have no idea. I remember when I first moved here talking to Tim Luini, and he was vehemently against carriage homes and was saying there will never be a carriage home in Revelstoke. I've never known why. But mind you, at that time, the city was trying to figure out how to keep patios off the streets for the restaurants and pubs as well. So
OCP, DCC came up, and Jackie brought up a good point. The OCP has been updated, but it was a matter of zoning that really needs to be addressed. I have heard that it's still stuck somewhere in the 70s. I can't confirm that. I have no idea if that's actually true. But if it is, I would imagine that doesn't really sit with today's living standards.
The OCP is not, I don't think it's as bad as people are saying it is. I just finished reading it a couple days ago. Yeah, the zoning should be readdressed. There's a few things in it that are need to be updated. For example, when it was written, there was really no such thing as Airbnb. So those issues related to that and the illegal vacation rentals in general just plain not addressed in it. So I think it needs to be reopened, and we should take a look at it. But I don't think it's as onerous a project as we may think.
So looking at it in a section, maybe let's focus on this part first. And if we need to address other areas in it, we can go from there after that.
Yeah, and I also think it's time for the community to once again get together and look at our collective vision, because we seem to be bickering over things. If we would get together and look at the bigger picture, then maybe we'd be more accepting of some of the stuff that people are arguing about on, in the social media and on the streets.
Love social media. It's fantastic.
It's kind of okay.
Steve Kent across from me chatting about yesterday's All Candidates Forum as well as his run for council. So one question that you had, or everyone had, was about the ALR land. And you had 1 minute to answer that question, but you were pretty prompt with that one. Although you said you were slightly overwhelmed and nervous about it, but you did have an answer for it about having land brought into the city. So I wanted to touch base with you on that one and give you a little bit more of a platform to talk about your decision on why you thought it would be a good idea.
You just don't want to be seen as attacking the ALR. It's a food supply, and food supply is a stated issue of this community. However, I just don't ever see those parcels as becoming farms again. What I've seen of the ground doesn't really support it. I just can't see that happening as we develop as a community, particularly with the resort taking off, if you like. It looks like the resort is poised to do more. It's got some new management people in there, and I'm very optimistic about that. It just looks to me like that is the logical extension for resort-related activities.
So what would you like personally to see for Revelstoke in the next 5 years? What's your vision of how it should be and look?
Love the direction that we've been taking. When I got here, it was a fun place, but was lacking in a lot of facilities. I thought stuff to do, not recreationally, but certainly entertainment-wise. I see the town growing at a pace that I really like, and I think we should just continue along that course.
When the mall came up, and more people are more comfortable saying, "Yeah, I was against it. Yeah, I was for it." Where were you in the idea behind it and that type of growth?
Well, I had trouble with the mall because in general terms, I thought it would be nice to have some commercial activity up on the highway. I don't really think it would draw people from town. I think it would take money from people going to and from Alberta, people that are otherwise going to go to Golden or Salmon Arm. However, the development as described bothered me because I didn't like the large pharmacy, because I know David. I could see him struggling with that, and I didn't like the idea of a large box store like a Walmart-y thing, because I just generally don't like to go in those places, and I'm happy to drive out of town to do that.
And you were a pretty big advocate for expanding, but keeping the core to its true value.
Right.
And how do you think that we're going to continue to do that as more businesses come and need commercial space? Maybe not necessarily big warehouse space, but in general, more commercial space.
I think we could have more commercial activity in town. We could expand the area somewhat so we had more stores in town. And I think that the downtown area will continue to be vibrant if we make it so. The Luna Festival on the weekend was a good example of what we can do to keep the downtown core as a place that you really want to be. I'm a very strong advocate of keeping people out of their cars. I like the idea of neighborhood commercial nodes. I think every neighborhood should have a pub. Well, I just think that, but and a small grocery store similar in size to say Le Marché, a cafe, and perhaps a couple other things, just so that everybody has the opportunity to walk instead of drive their car when they need a few items.
What's your thought on the idea of, if we have a good plan, a good OCP, you go back into the zoning, we fix it, and we start looking at the local contractors in town and say, okay, this is what you want to build, this is what we need, and try to find a balance where we can kind of work with them on their dream and their passion, and also go, but we also have to have this to keep things moving along progressively.
We don't seem to have our ducks in a row, if you like. It would be nice to be able to do that. So these are the opportunities for development that exist in Revelstoke. Everybody that wants to participate in that is welcome to do so. If we have a clear vision of that, we haven't stated it. And I think we could communicate that better to the development community. We seem to be reacting to things more than we need to be, but that is part, again, of the OCP. Although in general terms, it's all in there. It's not as outdated as our people are thinking. John Gunther was actually a fairly innovative fellow and very educated, and he did some good work on it before he left.
You know what didn't come up that much? A little bit here and there, but really hasn't in this election is, ironically, is the sewage lagoon.
Oh.
You know, like, I know you mentioned a few things about it, but it really kind of fell off the radar for some reason. So I know you've got a thought on it.
I do.
Sewage lagoon.
I think it's our biggest priority. The best thing that this upcoming council could do is hand over a fully functioning city to the next council. Whether you're pro-development or you don't want any development at all, people are coming. And the fact is we're just not ready for them in terms of the plumbing. And the sewage lagoon, it's not even remotely reasonable that thing has operated that poorly for so long and it hasn't been dealt with.
I don't think there's a large amount of money in the coffers for a new sewage lagoon. So that money will come from government grants. I'm sure some of it will, but some of it's going to have to come from those DCC fees, or you and me and the rest of the taxpayers, which is a heavy burden for 7,500 people.
Yes, it is, but we still have to deal with it. If we're not dealing with our poop, we're not doing our jobs.
That is what you probably should have used for your campaign slogan.
Well, no matter what it costs, we just plain have to do it. And my understanding is that facility was built to accommodate, I think it was 19,000 people, and it's not functioning correctly. And every few years we put a Band-Aid on it and it doesn't work. So it just seems to me that there has to be a solution out there. And the fact that we're not finding it is pretty hard for me to understand.
All right. So that's one of your top priorities,
I'd say.
Steve, is there anything that I didn't ask or that you didn't get a chance to express today or last night that you want to touch base on and let the listener know about you, or a topic that you're passionate about?
Just a couple of things. The DCC discussion, I think, has to go back on the table as soon as possible. I think we have to get something in place with new rates for the next building season would be ideal. We don't have to reinvent it. I think we can pick up where the previous council left off. And as well, I just like to say that I'm filled with a lot of confidence in the candidates that are showing up. I think we're going to get a very good council this year, and I think Revelstoke can be very comfortable with that.
All right, well, we've been chatting with Steve Kent, running for council. Steve, if somebody has questions for you, how do they get a hold?
Well, no one seems to have had any trouble doing it so far. My Facebook page is Steve Kent, it is, and most people just contact me that way, or I'm always out and around. You can find me at Home Hardware in Rona, certainly.
All right, track him down if you got any questions. Thanks, Steve, for coming in.
Thanks, Sean.